Choosing Home by ginnyrules27. Chapter 39. I'm sorry for the delay, but things have been mental here. Gia smiled as she watched her young daughter play with her husband. It was nice to be able to have these moments, even though they all knew that, legally, Gia held no claim to Genevieve. Gia didn't care, though. She knew she was lucky that the former monarchs allowed her to be in Genevieve's life, and that she got to know who Gia was. Gia knew it could have been so easy for the Lebetes to say no, she'd be a stranger to her daughter, especially with who Genevieve's biological grandfather was. But Belle and Beast hadn't done that. They welcomed Gia into their family and, in doing so, allowed Genevieve to know her aunts and her Uncle Gil, not to mention her cousins Gwen and Marcos. There's another member of her family now, though, Gia thought with a small sigh. Mal had told her about Matt, Zevon's son, and now Genevieve's biological half-brother. Gia had talked it over with Hayden about what they should tell Genevieve, or if they should even be the ones to tell her. After all, Belle and Beast were legally her parents. But Gia knew it wouldn't be the same coming from someone else, and that she was a kid of the Isle of the Lost. They didn't run from their problems, even if all Gia wanted was to push the issue back until Genevieve was older. Like going to college older. Hey, Jean, can you come over here, please? I'd like to talk to you. Gia called. Okay, Mama. Genevieve nodded and gave Hayden a small hug. Thank you for playing with me, Perry.
Hey, we can play again after your mama's done talking with you, okay?
Hayden said with a smile. They hadn't been quite sure what his title would be after he and Gia got married, but it had been surprisingly Beast to offer a suggestion. Since Père was French for father, it would make sense if Hayden had something like that in his title, since Beast was Papa. It had been Genevieve who had dubbed the half-dwarf her Perry. Is everything okay, Mama? Genevieve asked, as the two moved to a more private area. Gia sighed softly and knelt down so that she was looking her daughter in the eyes. Jean, sweetie, you know how, even though you have your mama and papa, I'm also your mama? Uh-huh, Genevieve nodded. Well, you also have another papa, Gia said, even though she hated the fact that Zevon had any claim over her daughter whatsoever. Other than maybe a penchant for making potions, also known as mixing up her bubble baths to see if they'd create more bubbles, Genevieve hadn't shown any indication towards a fondness for magic. Genevieve tilted her head. Another papa? Like Perry? No, Gia sighed, before brushing a bit of hair out of her eyes. You know how you have your mama, who you live with, but she's Ben's blood mama? Uh-huh. Genevieve nodded. You're my blood mama. Right, Gia nodded with a smile. Well, you also have a blood papa. But why haven't I met him? Genevieve asked as she tilted her head once more. Papa said he wouldn't keep me from my blood family if I wanted to know them. Gia sighed once more. The reason you haven't met him yet is because he's still on the Isle of the Lost, she told her daughter. But according to Papa, people who are still on the Isle are bad, Genevieve said softly. Are you saying I'm bad, Mama? No, Gia said quickly, shaking her head. You are not bad, my sweet girl. I just wanted to tell you about him because, well, your papa, mama all wanted to tell you that you have a little brother. A brother? Like Bibi? Exactly like King Ben. Only this brother would be younger than you. Gia said, your father, he had another child. Did he not want me because I'm a girl, Mama? Is that why I'm with Mama and Papa? Genevieve's small voice honestly broke Gia's heart, and she quickly wrapped her up into her arms. No, honey. And even if that were the case, you don't need him. She said, you have your Papa, and you have your Perry. Remember what Ben always says? Blood doesn't make family, Genevieve said softly, wiping away some of the tears that had started to roll down her cheeks. Gia nodded. Exactly, sweetheart. And I'm so sorry, honey. I never wanted to hurt you by telling you. We all thought it might be easier to tell you sooner, because there might be a chance your brother could end up in Oradon. Why? Genevieve asked, sniffing softly. Because he'd have a chance for a good life here if he wants it, Gia explained. And shouldn't he get the chance to meet the world's best big sister? I thought that was Queen Mel, Genevieve said softly. After all, Rhea says there's no sister better than Queen Mel. Okay, first of all, remind me to introduce Lady Rhea to your Auntie Piper, and then have her say no one's better than Mal, Gia said, and smiled as she heard the giggles coming from her daughter. And, second of all, no one's expecting you to accept your brother right away, honey. That's not fair to you. Then why are you telling me, Mama? Because you have the right to know, Gia said, and gave her daughter a small smile. I once grew up in a world where I had no control over my life. That's the last thing I want for you. Genevieve smiled softly. Thank you, Mama. Can I go now? Of course, sweetheart. Gia nodded and watched as Genevieve walked off. She sighed and shook her head. Did she do the right thing? Don't second-guess yourself. Hayden's voice came from behind her. You know it's better that she learn from you now than learn from Kingdom gossips years from now. How do you know what I was thinking? Gia asked as she looked over at Hayden. It was a lucky guess, Hayden said before kissing the top of her head. You told her about Zevon's kid. Yeah, Gia nodded with a small sigh. I know it might be too early, but, like you said, she deserved to hear it from me. I wish Zevon wasn't the only way she could have a sibling. Hayden gave her a small, slightly sad smile as he held her close. He's not. Remember, she's also King Ben's little sister. And now she has a niece and nephew who'll practically be siblings to her, with how the age gap is between them. I'm sure King Ben would appreciate that, Gia said with a small smile before sighing. I'm sorry. For what? Hayden asked, tilting his head. That we never had kids of our own. Hayden shook his head. Gia, I told you back when we were dating, and then again after we got married. I'm fine not having kids of my own. I have a plethora of siblings and cousins I can be the fun uncle for if I need to be. And what's more, you are not a baby machine, Gia. If you don't want to have any more kids after Genevieve, then that's your choice. No one can make that choice for you. Gia smiled and gently kissed Hayden on the cheek. How did I get so lucky to find you? I believe we both went into Weavy's at the same time, and ended up leaving with both our orders and a lunch date. Hayden said with a small smile. I think you might be right. Gia chuckled and shook her head. Lacey had been the one to introduce Gia to dance after Genevieve had been born, both as a way to get her mind off of the birth and to help her lose the birth weight. Plus, Gia found it was a great way to gain some muscle that she hadn't been able to gain on the aisle. Well, at some point, her hobby had expanded to allow her the chance to dance competitively. Gia wasn't going to pass up the chance to be more than the VK the Lebetes took pity on and adopted her child, especially since dancing competitively allowed her to raise money to go to school. Evie had offered to make the dance costumes free of charge once she had heard. Normally, Gia would have refused, but she didn't really have the money to afford decent dance costumes of her own, even though she knew Piper would have loaned her the money if she'd asked, and so would Gil for that matter. But Gia wanted to be able to do it on her own. Had it not been for the fact that Evie had helped out other VKs with their businesses, specifically Ginny Gothel and Quinn, Queen of Heart's daughter, Gia might have felt like Evie was only making an offer because she was Gil's sister. After all, Gil was the first, and, as of that moment, the only male seamster under Evie's employ. Not that Gia was complaining, mind you. Gil insisted on making her dance costume once he had heard who the order was for, and Gia had been able to have a front row seat of how happy her brother was. It was no secret among the VKs, or even the adults of the Isle, that the youngest male legume was something of a disappointment to his father, and Gia just couldn't understand why. Gil had been put under the protection of the biggest gang on the Isle. He had the best access to food, and, knowing how kind he was, Gil likely would have shared it. Plus, his sewing hobby made it so they all weren't wearing rags 24/7. Unfortunately, trying to figure out the inner working of her father's mind only left Gia with a headache. It had been a happy accident that Hayden had been coming into Evie Four Hearts just as Gia was there to pick up another dance costume for her competition that weekend. Hayden had been one of the 4 boys on the cheerleading team at Oradon Prep, and it was something he had stuck with, since he'd been able to earn a cheerleading scholarship to college. Unfortunately, college cheerleading was a bit more intense than prep school cheerleading, had been so that Hayden's uniform would often get rips or tears or stains. Things that would be often hard to fix on a college student's income. It had been Evie who reached out to Hayden and offered to repair the uniform for free, since they'd been on the cheerleading team at Oradon Prep. Hayden had, at first, turned her down, claiming he didn't want any special treatment. After all, King, Ben and Queen Mal paid for their items. Why should he get any freebies? In the end, though, he had accepted the offer once his cousin Doug had gotten involved. Gia didn't know the whole story as to why the son of Dobie had gotten involved, but she was glad he did. She might not have gotten to meet her husband otherwise.
What are you thinking about?
Hayden asked. How glad I am that Doug talked sense into you, she said with a small chuckle. We might not have met otherwise.
Hayden shook his head. I still don't see why it was such a big deal to have me pay. I know Doug would have insisted on paying if the situation was reversed. Plus, it would have been helped out his girlfriend's business, so that's a win-win.
Well, and this is just coming from an Isle perspective, but Evie might have seen you as an ally. Gia said, we don't mistreat our allies on the Isle, and it was commonplace to have a deal like the one Evie gave you. I mean, Lord Hades would give free food to the VKs.
He would? Hayden asked, more than a little surprised.
Gia nodded. Looking back, I have to wonder why my sisters and I didn't go to Lord Hades' restaurant more. His policy was the most Oradon out of anyone on the Isle, since he believed that the kids shouldn't have to pay for what their parents did. There were only a few kids who did have to pay, or even got banned from the restaurant.
Whoa, what did they do?
Made enemies with Mal and Uma, according to the Isle gossip and Gil, Gia said with a small sigh. Maybe that was why Piper didn't use that resource more, other than maybe a few times growing up when we were desperate for food. Because it was so easy to have it taken away from us.
But you wouldn't have made enemies with Queen Mal or Lady Uma?
Hayden asked.
Would you?
Gia shook her head. Of course not. That would have made life difficult for Gil, and he's my big brother. I know he likes to say that older siblings should look after younger, but since Lachlan proved that's clearly not the case for her, I don't see why I can't look out for my older siblings.
You are never going to let go of your Lachlan hatred, are you?
She deserves the Isle for what she did, Gia said firmly. She took Brooke from a place where she was safe, a place she had people looking out for her. And instead of at least telling her to go to us, she took her to Freddy! I know we're not supposed to wish ill on the dead, but gods, I hope Lord Hades is tormenting the hell out of Freddy right now.
I'm sure he is, Hayden said. Didn't you say that Brooke was doing better with her new therapist?
Gia nodded. Yeah. Dr. Ulieta has helped Brooke tremendously. I mean, she was already making progress with Dr. Hopper, but having a female therapist...
I get it, Hayden said,
gently wrapping his arms around Gia. Dr. Ulieta Madrigal had been a fairly recent addition to the sparse collection of therapists, though with the increase in VK population, that number had grown exponentially. When asked why she wanted to go through all that work, when she was already an established healer in her village, Ulieta had said that she had seen firsthand how holding things in could hurt others. She had failed to see that her brother was holding back hurt, that her daughters were holding back hurt, and she had also seen how her mother's repression of her grief had hurt her for 50 years. She didn't want anyone else having to go through that. To everyone's surprise, it had been Queen Mal to be Dr. Ulieta's first client. When she'd been interviewed as to why she went, Mal simply stated that the first time she had tried therapy, the therapist in question wasn't the most professional. And while she trusted Dr. Ulieta, she also wanted to make sure any young VKs going to her wouldn't be alone with someone who would just berate them and make them feel small in the world that had already made them feel that. After the session, Mal could be quoted as saying, "If anyone doesn't go to her for any reason other than they're already comfortable with their current therapists, they're idiots. Plus, you get free cookies with your sessions. I didn't know you could put strawberries in cookies, but the cookies feel like a warm hug." Needless to say, a lot more of the lower-leveled VKs were signing up to be clients of Dr. Ulieta's, especially if they were female, lower-ranked VKs. A small pressure near her calves made Gia smile as she looked down, breaking slightly from the hug. "What are you doing?" Gia asked Genevieve. "Barry said we could play when we were done talking," Genevieve said. "So, we're playing." "Oh? And what are we playing?" "Hug Mama!"
Hayden couldn't help but chuckle at that. "I think that's a game I'd be happy to play," he said as Gia sank back into his embrace.
"Me too," Gia said with a small smile. "Me too." End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. And Ginny, again, I'm so sorry. Things have been mental here preparing for Christmas. My bedroom's getting refitted. It's been a bit mad here, so I uploaded a bit late. Anyway, I just love that chapter. Very tactful way of explaining it to the young girl. And I love that bit about Ulieta being a therapist because of what happened to her family in the encounter. That's really good. Sorry about that noise, microphone fell over, but I'm too lazy to change it this time. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, girls and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.